Halloween, and like every year, the neighborhood was filling up with trick-or-treaters and decorations. I wasn't planning on doing anything special that night. At 27, Halloween was more about handing out candy than going to parties or wearing costumes. My boyfriend Rob had to work late that night, so I was alone at home, in charge of distributing candy to the kids. Our neighborhood was pretty tight-knit. It was one of those smaller communities where people knew each other well, and Halloween was a big deal. Almost every house was decorated, some even going all out with elaborate haunted house setups. Since Rob was working and I was home alone, our place was decorated more modestly. I had put a few pumpkins on the porch and hung a scarecrow on a hook by the front door. The first few hours of the evening were normal enough. Groups of kids came by in their costumes, excitedly grabbing candy from the bowl I had set out. I'd smile, hand out candy, and go back inside to watch TV, waiting for the next knock. By 9, the flow of trick-or-treaters had slowed down. Most of the little kids had gone home, and I figured it wouldn't be long before I could turn off the porch light and call it a night. That's when I heard a hard pounding on the door. I opened it, expecting a group of teenagers, but instead, there's just this one guy standing on the porch. He wasn't even wearing a costume, just a black hoodie with the hood pulled low over his face. He was tall and, I'd guess, in his late 20s or early 30s. He stood there with a sort of aggressive posture that made me uneasy. It didn't help that he wasn't carrying a bag or anything and had his hands in his pockets. I looked behind him to see if he was with his kid or something, but he was alone. I hesitated for a second, waiting for him to say trick or treat or something, but he didn't say a word. Finally, I asked, "Can I help you?" For an awkwardly long time, he didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring. I could barely see his face under the hood, but I could feel his eyes on me. "Trick or treat?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. Still nothing, just silence. I took a half step back and started to close the door. That's when he finally spoke up. "Are you alone tonight?" he said in a loud whisper, sounding like Batman. The question caught me off guard. My stomach dropped. It wasn't the kind of thing you'd expect someone to ask, especially a stranger on Halloween. "No," I said, my voice steady. "My boyfriend's inside. What do you want?" He didn't move, didn't respond. He just stood there, creating a super awkward feeling. "I think you have the wrong house," I said, as I started to close the door. "There's no more candy." He didn't answer. Instead, he just turned and walked away slowly, almost deliberately. I watched as he disappeared down the sidewalk, my heart still pounding. I closed the door and locked it, feeling totally creeped out. All I could think about for the next half hour was that weird guy. I told myself it was nothing, probably just some dude messing around, but the uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. I kept looking out the window, half expecting him to come back, but the streets were pretty much empty by this point. After about an hour, with nothing more happening, I started to calm down, thinking maybe it was just my imagination running wild. I went back to the couch, swiping through Instagram, hoping like hell that Rob would get home soon. Then there was another knock. This time, it was louder and even more forceful. I froze, staring at the door. My heart was racing again, and my mind immediately went to the man in the hoodie. I grabbed my phone off the coffee table and pulled up Rob's number, just in case. Slowly, I approached the door and looked through the peephole. No one was there. My mind was spinning, and my heart was pounding even harder. I waited momentarily, wondering if maybe it was just some kids playing a prank, but the street was quiet. There were no footsteps, no laughter, nothing. I opened the door a crack, peeking out into the night. Still nothing. I stepped outside onto the porch and glanced up and down the street. The neighborhood was quiet now. Most houses had their lights off, and the last trick-or-treaters were long gone. I still felt off and couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I was about to go back inside when I saw him standing at the end of my driveway, the man in the black hoodie. He was just standing there, completely still, facing my house. My immediate thought was to turn around and run back inside, but something kept me rooted in place. "What do you want?" I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. He didn't answer. He just stood there, watching. I could barely see his face under the hood, but I knew he was looking right at me. My hand tightened around my phone. I didn't know what to do. Should I call the police? My head was spinning, trying to make sense of what was happening and what I should do. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away, disappearing down the street. I didn't move for a long time. I just stood there, staring after him, my heart pounding. Finally, I went back inside, locked all the doors, and checked the windows. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just a guy messing around on Halloween. I even thought it could have been one of my friends just trying to scare the shit out of me. But I didn't really have any prankster kind of friends. My gut instinct felt something was wrong. Like maybe he was casing the place to rob it and didn't expect me to be home or something. I knew I was spinning out, but couldn't stop myself. It was all so weird and unexpected. I sat back down on the sofa, but couldn't calm down. Every little noise made me jump. I tried calling Rob again, but he didn't pick up. Great. I texted him, asking when he'd be home, but there was no response. I kept watching the TV, then back at the front door, over and over again, half expecting the man to come back. By now, it's nearly 11 p.m., and Rob should have been home by now. I tried calling him again, but it went straight to voicemail. I was starting to freak out even more. It wasn't like him to ignore my calls. I was spinning out again, so I decided to drive to his work, thinking maybe his phone had died, or he was stuck working late. I grabbed my car keys, threw on my jacket, and headed out the door. I stopped dead in my tracks while putting the key into the ignition. There, stuck under the windshield wiper, was a note. It was a single piece of paper folded in half. My hands were shaking as I picked it up and unfolded it. The note was short, written in block letters, like a child's. It said only 4 words. "He's not coming home." I felt the blood drain from my face. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought I might pass out. I looked around, but the street was empty. No sign of the guy, no sign of anyone really. Just an empty street. I ran back inside, locked the door, and called the police. I sat on the sofa, shaking, when the phone buzzed. It was Rob. Thankfully, he was okay. He had fallen asleep at work and hadn't seen my messages. The note, though, it was real. The cops took it seriously. They walked around the house looking to see if the guy had tried to break in, but there was no evidence he had. Unfortunately, there wasn't much the cops could do. I couldn't even provide much of a description, and no real crime had been committed. That was the scariest Halloween I'd ever had. I don't know how the guy knew Rob was at work, and I was home alone. He had to have been watching me for some time. I started to suspect it could have been one of our neighbors, but who knows? Rob and I moved out early the following year. The whole thing freaked me out so much, I couldn't stay there any longer. Next month will be my first Halloween at my new place. I'll be home alone again, waiting, watching. My friends and I thought it would be fun to visit a new haunted house in town that everyone was talking about. It was Halloween night, and we wanted to do something really, really scary. The haunted house was called Heretic House, and it was one of those extreme haunted house attractions that was more about psychological terror rather than ghosts jumping out at you. These are the kind of intense Halloween attractions to hit if you want to experience the kind of real terror that sticks with you long after the show is over. People said it was the most terrifying haunted house they'd ever been to. We were all excited and a little nervous too. I mean, it's one thing to watch scary movies, but this was supposed to be the real deal. When we got there, the place looked like an old, creepy mansion, just like in the movies. The windows were broken, and the paint was peeling off the walls. There was fog everywhere, and the air felt cold, even though it wasn't that chilly outside. A man in a tattered suit stood at the entrance, grinning at us with a crooked smile. He looked like he just walked out of a graveyard. He didn't say anything. He just handed us each a ticket and pointed to the door. Once we were inside, the atmosphere changed completely. It was dark, with only a few dim lights flickering above us. Creepy music played in the background, mixed with distant screams and weird noises that made my skin crawl. The first room was filled with fake cobwebs, and plastic spiders hung from the ceiling. At first, we laughed and joked around, pretending to be scared. But as we went further in, things started to feel off. The actors inside the haunted house were really convincing. Too convincing. They weren't like the usual people you see in haunted houses who pop out and scream boo and then laugh when you jump. These people were different. They moved slowly, their eyes never blinking, and their faces twisted into disturbing expressions. One of them, a woman in a blood-stained dress, followed us for a long time, just staring at us with a blank look. It was creepy, but we kept telling ourselves it was all just part of the act. As we continued, we entered a maze of hallways that seemed to go on forever. The walls were covered in what looked like old, torn wallpaper, and the floorboards creaked under our feet. The lights flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls. I noticed that the actors weren't just jumping out to scare us anymore. They were watching us, following us, like they were waiting for something. Then it happened. My friend Lauren, who was walking ahead of us, suddenly disappeared. One second, she was there, and the next, she was gone. At first, we thought she was playing a prank on us, but when we called out her name, there was no answer. We searched everywhere, but she was nowhere to be found. Panic started to set in. We knew this was supposed to be a haunted house, but something felt wrong. Really wrong. We tried to retrace our steps, but the maze seemed different, like the walls had moved. We kept getting turned around, and no matter which way we went, we couldn't find the way out. The actors weren't helping us either. They just stood there, watching us with those cold, empty eyes. One of them, a tall man with a butcher's apron, whispered something to me as I passed by. His voice was low, almost a growl, but I could barely make out the words. "You're not getting out." By this point, we were all freaked out. We didn't care about the haunted house anymore. We just wanted to find Lauren and leave. But the more we searched, the more we realized we were trapped. The halls twisted and turned, leading us in circles. We started shouting for help, hoping someone outside would hear us, but the walls seemed to swallow our voices. Then we heard the screams. They weren't coming from the speakers anymore. These were real, terrified screams coming from deep within the house. It sounded like Lauren, and she was begging for help. We ran toward the sound, but every time we thought we were getting closer, it would move, like the house was playing tricks on us. Finally, we reached a dead end. The walls closed in around us, and there was no way out. That's when the lights went out completely, plunging us into total darkness. We could hear footsteps coming closer and the sound of heavy breathing. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would explode. I could feel someone's breath on the back of my neck, but when I turned around, no one was there. Suddenly, a dim light flickered on, revealing a small door at the end of the hallway. We ran to it, desperate to escape. The door led to a staircase, and we rushed down it, not caring where it went, as long as it was away from whatever was chasing us. The stairs seemed to go on forever, winding down into what felt like the basement of the house. At the bottom, we found ourselves in a small, dark room. In the middle of the room was a single chair, and sitting in the chair, tied up and gagged, was Lauren. Her eyes were wide with fear, and she was trying to scream through the gag. We rushed to untie her, but before we could, the door slammed shut behind us, trapping us in the room. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the sound of someone laughing, a deep, sinister laugh that echoed through the room. When I woke up, we were outside the haunted house, lying on the cold ground. Lauren was with us, but she was different. She wouldn't speak, wouldn't even look at us. We never found out what happened in that house, but we knew one thing for sure. We would never, ever go back. I'm unsure how to start this, and I'm sorry if it sounds confusing. The story you're about to hear is what happened to me a couple of Halloweens ago. I don't like bringing it up, but my friend insists it might help get it out in the open. I was in my junior year at the University of Miami when my friend and I were invited to this college party at this house in Key Biscayne. The place was massive, with a huge backyard and direct beach access. The party theme was seductive, so my friend went as a risque nurse, while I dressed as Harley Quinn from the Suicide Squad. There must have been around 60 to 70 people, but the house was so big it didn't feel crowded. I'm not much of a drinker, but I had some fruit punch since everyone was pushing me to have fun. At some point, a group of people asked us to take pictures, so I set my cup down and joined in. We must have been taking photos for what felt like forever. Eventually, I went back for my drink and took a sip without even thinking about how long it had been left out. A guy I didn't recognize walked up to me. He seemed older, maybe in his late 20s or early 30s. He said my boyfriend's name and mentioned he'd been trying to reach me. That's when I realized I didn't have my phone with me. I felt guilty because I'd promised to check in since my boyfriend had to work that night. The man looked worried and said it was urgent. He offered me his phone to call from one of the upstairs rooms. I didn't think twice about it. If my boyfriend really needed to get a hold of me, it had to be important, so I followed him. As soon as I stepped into the room, though, I felt like all the energy had been sucked out of me. He shut the door quietly behind us. I was already feeling dizzy and sat down on the bed. He handed me his phone, but my fingers were numb, and I could barely dial. I felt weaker with every second, as if a heavy fog was settling in my head. He helped me lie back, and before I knew it, everything went dark. I woke up much later with no clue where I was or what happened. When I came to, I saw my friend leaning over me, wiping something off my chest with a napkin. She was panicking, muttering under her breath. It took a few seconds to really understand what was happening. I realized I was still in the bedroom, lying on a bed, with my friend trying to clean me up. That's when the panic hit, my chest tightening as I processed what this could mean. I felt sick, wondering if something terrible had been done to me. My friend tried to calm me down, swearing that nothing too bad had happened. She explained she had lost track of me during the party. After searching for a while, she thought I'd just gone to the bathroom or outside to the beach for some fresh air. But when I didn't show up for a while, she started getting worried and decided to check the rooms. That's when she found me passed out on the bed with that guy from earlier. She said he was bent over me, his mouth pressed against my chest. He was using my unconscious body for some twisted drinking game, taking shots off me, sucking alcohol out of my belly button, licking salt from my chest, and then kissing me. My friend wasn't sure how long it had been going on, but when she walked in, he looked like he was just getting started. Hearing this made me want to vomit. I was shaking, tears filling my eyes. I felt gross and disgusted. How could I have let this happen? Just as I started spiraling, my friend told me that she'd already called my boyfriend. He'd finished his shift early and was on his way to pick me up. She tried asking around about the guy, but no one knew him or remembered seeing him arrive. Apparently, he was just some random guy who had slipped into the party unnoticed. When my boyfriend arrived, I could barely look at him. He was furious, but tried to hold it together for my sake. He and my friend helped me out of the house and took me straight to urgent care. I just wanted to get out of there, to leave that place and forget the whole night. At the clinic, they ran some tests. Thankfully, the drug that had knocked me out didn't seem to have caused any permanent damage, but feeling of helplessness lingered long after. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but a few days later, I started getting texts from an unknown number. At first, the messages were random. Things like, "How's your day?" or "Did you miss me?" I ignored them, thinking it was some prank or spam. But then he sent a photo of me in my Harley Quinn costume. My heart dropped when I saw it. He'd taken the picture at that party, in that bedroom. The texts quickly shifted from vague comments to outright threats, saying he was watching me and that he knew where I lived. I felt trapped. I tried blocking the number, but he kept finding new ways to reach me. The thought of going to the police crossed my mind, but I didn't have any real evidence aside from the texts, and I didn't want to draw more attention to myself. I thought about trying to lure him out somehow, setting up a trap to catch him. But I didn't know how dangerous he was, or if he'd show up at all. It's been months, and the messages still come sometimes. Each time, I feel that same chill run down my spine, wondering if he's outside my window or watching from a distance. I don't know who he is or what he's capable of, and that's the worst part. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and I hope to see you next Halloween.